The amphitheater had been carved straight into the bones of the mountain. Tier after tier of stone rising beneath a blood-red moon. Torches burned along every ledge and balcony, throwing wild, flickering light over a sea of faces, wolves in fine clothes and war leathers, their eyes bright with hunger and curiosity. It was the night of choosing. Once in a century, the Night King walked this path under the open sky and let the moon guide his hand to a single mate. Songs had been written about it. Ballads whispered that fate itself leaned down to watch. Tonight, fate felt more like a crowd. On the lowest tier, near the glowing pulse of the ritual circle, a line of young women waited. Silver gowns shimmered as they shifted their weight. Every movement practiced. Every smile carefully arranged. Jewels glittered at their throats, matching the crests stitched into their bodices. Stormridge, Ironvale, Red Moon, daughters of power and old blood. Polished for this moment since the day they'd taken their first breath, they tilted their chins just so. Shoulders back, eyes shining with the bright, brittle hope of girls who'd been told their entire lives that this night would crown them or crush them. Higher up, the Alphas and Lunas watched like it was a play written for their amusement. Men in dark suits and women in gowns that caught the torchlight like spilled wine murmured behind gloved hands. Trading bets and rumors. Somewhere, a flute tried to fight its way through the noise and failed. At the very end of the line, half in shadow, stood the girl no one bothered to look at twice. Raina Frost's wrists still ached where the shackles had been. The angry red bands around her skin were hidden now by the two long sleeves of a plain gray dress. The fabric rough where it brushed her knuckles. The gown hung wrong on her narrow frame, like it had been snatched off a market stall and yanked over her head on the way out the door. Her dark hair had been braided tight, not with ribbons or gems, but with shaking hands and impatience. A few strands had already escaped to cling to her cheek. She resisted the urge to wipe them away. Any movement at all might draw attention. Her father's shove still lived between her shoulder blades. He'd pushed her into place like a sack of grain, then stepped back without bothering to straighten her dress or her spine. An afterthought fulfilling a legal obligation, the silent Frost Girl. They called her in the Frostfall pack, the one who never laughed at the bonfires, never shifted under the moon, never howled with the others, the one who had failed her first shift at 16 and every attempt after that. 2 weeks ago, she'd been something worse than a whisper. She had been a spectacle, on the Frostfall terrace, with the entire pack watching. Her arranged mate had taken her hands, looked into her eyes, and pronounced his judgment: defective, wolfless, probably barren. He'd let the rejection words fall from his mouth like ash, breaking the bond before it ever formed. The severing hadn't hurt her heart. There had been nothing there to tear. What had hurt was the laughter that followed, the pitying looks, the way her father's fingers had tightened on her arm later that night. His voice low with a fury he didn't even try to hide. If you shame this family again, you'll wish you'd never been born. The memory tasted like blood and cold stone. It smelled like the cellar he'd locked her in afterward. Damp and windowless. Dust thick enough to choke on. 3 days in the dark to think about how she'd embarrassed him. 3 days with the echo of his threat for company. Now she stood at the Night King's choosing, the skin at her wrists itching with phantom iron, and tried to make herself small enough to disappear. She fixed her gaze on the carved floor beneath her bare feet and repeated the only prayer she had left: don't be seen. Don't be chosen. Then you get to disappear again. The others whispered behind their painted mouths, too enthralled with their own reflections to bother lowering their voices. That's her. Frostfall's shame, the one who couldn't shift. He said her wolf never answered. Can you imagine? Soft gasps. Cruel giggles. The click of a pearl earring as someone turned to stare, then turned away just as quickly. As if even looking at her might be contagious, Raina didn't flinch. Years of practice had taught her how to freeze her face into something blank and steady. Something that wouldn't crack when the words hit. Her hands trembled where they were folded in front of her. So she dug her nails into her own palms until the sting of pain cut through the noise. Up above, A horn sounded deep, resonant, rolling across stone and skin like distant thunder. The Night King had arrived. Silence fell in layers. Conversations trailed off. Laughter died. The very air seemed to hold its breath as footsteps echoed at the top of the amphitheater. The sound was slow and unhurried, each step heavy with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. Darius Nightwind walked down through his gathered court like he was descending from another world. He wore black. Not the polished black of a ballroom, but the kind that drank in light. A cloak of thick fur draped over his shoulders, its edges whispering against the stone. A crown of hammered silver rested on his dark hair, shaped like crescent fangs curving toward one another above his brow. A jagged scar cut from his temple to his jaw, pale against tanned skin. A reminder that whatever throne he sat on had not been handed to him gently. The youngest Night King in centuries, the stories said, taking the crown in a storm of blood and ash. Some swore he had slaughtered an entire rogue army alone under one moon, shifting until his fur ran red and his eyes burned like coals. Others whispered of a curse. Any mate he chose would die. Under the blood moon, his gaze swept over the glittering line of noble daughters. Shoulders straightened as he passed. Smiles sharpened. Hands brushed subtly at hair and jewelry. Small movements that begged, "Choose me. See me. Let it be me." He did not slow. Past Stormridge Gold and Ironvale Steel and Red Moon Scarlet he moved. Expression unreadable. Eyes flicking over them like they were pages in a book he'd already memorized. Past the richest dresses, past the brightest eyes, down the line, toward the shadow at the end. Reyna felt him before she dared to lift her head. A pressure against her skin. A weight on her lungs. The strange sensation of being noticed, like the air around her had thickened, humming with something wild and dangerous and alive. Her heart lurched once, hard, and then forgot how to beat. His boots stopped in front of her, for a heartbeat. For 3. For 10. She tried to pretend he was looking past her, through her, at someone more appropriate standing behind. But the weight of that gaze did not move on. A scarred hand reached out, roughened knuckles brushing her jaw as his fingers curled under her chin. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, flinching like she'd been trained to at the first sign of touch. Muscles tightened. Breath caught. Every instinct screaming to brace for pain. Instead, there was only the steady, unshakable warmth of his hand and the faint, electric thrum of something she had no name for, slowly, like someone lifting a curtain in a room that had always been dark. He raised her face. "Look at me," he said, voice low and gravel soft. The words settling over her skin like a command and a plea all at once. Reyna's lashes lifted. Her gaze met his. Eyes the color of storm-lit silver caught hers and held them. And the world dropped away, under the blood-red moon. His irises flashed bright metallic. A wolf's gaze flaring through a man's face. The torches seemed to flicker harder. The mark at the base of her throat, one that had never existed, burned phantom hot, as if something had reached through her bones to claim a place there. For the first time in her life, something deep inside her chest stirred. Not a flicker, not a whimper, a faint, distant howl. Answering him, the sound never made it past her lips, but it echoed through her ribs. Stunned and disbelieving, she didn't know what it meant. She only knew that whatever it was, it had been waiting for this moment. The amphitheater held its breath. Blood roared in her ears. His silver eyes burned brighter. Like the moon had just chosen something, and he was the only one who understood what. Then, in the heartbeat between what she had been and whatever she was about to become, the world seemed to tilt, and everything went black. Sound returned first. It came in like a wave breaking over her gasps. Shouts. The rustle of bodies shifting on stone seats. Voices tangled together in a roar. But one voice cut straight through the noise. Clear and steady as steel. "I choose Reyna Frost of Frostfall Pack as my mate and queen." Her name slammed into her like impact. Reyna's eyes flew open. She was still standing in the amphitheater, Knees locked, fingers clenched in the fabric of her dress. The torches burned too bright. The blood moon hung heavy overhead. Every face in the crowd seemed turned toward her at once. Eyes wide with disbelief or narrowed with fury. Mate. Queen. The words didn't fit her. They slid over the outer shell of her like clothes that weren't hers, catching on every place she knew herself to be wrong. Up on the higher tiers, nobles erupted in whispers, shock rippling outward in every direction. Has he lost his mind? The Frost Girl. That can't be right. He can't mark a wolfless mate. Her father stood among the Frostfall delegation. Jaw clenched so tight, she could see the muscles jump beneath his skin. His hands, those same hands that had locked the cellar door, pressed flat at his sides. For a heartbeat. She thought he might step forward and object publicly. He didn't. He just went very, very still. The kind of still that meant danger. Darius was close now. So close she could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. The world narrowed until there was nothing left but the man in black and the weight of his gaze. The amphitheater. The moon. The crowd, all of it faded to a dull, distant hum. His hand moved from her chin to her throat. Not squeezing, just resting. Fingers spread over the hollow there, as if claiming that space. His thumb brushed the side of her neck. Slow and deliberate, the touch burned, then it blazed. Light flared under his thumb. Bright and cold and impossibly alive. It wasn't a flame you could see with your eyes. Not exactly. It was something felt more than witnessed. Searing across her skin and sinking straight into bone, a mark bloomed there. Formed not of ink or scar, but of shimmering silver light. If she could have seen it, she would have seen the curve of a crescent wolf, head lifted in a soundless howl. A single white star set where its eye should be. Reyna felt it rather than saw it. Felt it etching itself into her. Threading through blood and nerve and memory, fire and ice exploded through her veins. Heat surged from the base of her skull down her spine, pouring into every limb until her fingers tingled and her toes curled against the stone. At the same time, a ribbon of cold slid through her, sharp and clean like mountain air in winter, like the moment before snow falls. For the first time in 21 years, something deep inside her answered. It woke with a jolt, like someone tearing open a locked door. Not fully, not with the roaring. A wild certainty she'd always imagined a wolf to have, but with a faint, raw sound that was undeniably there. A howl, thin and distant, as if it were coming from miles away through falling snow. It echoed down corridors that had been walled off since she was a child, brushing up against her fear, her shame, the hollow spaces where she'd learned to tuck her want for more. It slid around her father's threats and the memory of cold iron, refusing to be turned aside. I'm here. The sensation lasted only a heartbeat. 2. Maybe 3. Then the world tilted again. The torches blurred. The blood moon smeared red across the sky. The amphitheater dissolved into streaks of light and shadow as her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the stone, the mark on her neck still burning like a brand. And then there was only darkness and the steady chill of mountain air. When she woke, the world was quiet. Silence lay over the room like a blanket, thick and soft and expensive. She lay on her back, staring up at a ceiling carved with constellations she didn't recognize. Each star picked out in silver that glowed faintly in the dim light. The bed beneath her was enormous. Sinks you down soft, draped in black velvet that caught on her calloused fingertips when she moved. A fire murmured in a stone hearth across the room, throwing gentle warmth against the cool bite of the altitude. She was not in Frostfall anymore. Reyna pushed herself up slowly, every muscle stiff. The motion tugged at the side of her neck, drawing her attention there like a magnet. Her fingers drifted to the place his thumb had pressed. The skin was warm, not feverish, but alive in a way the rest of her body wasn't. Beneath her fingertips, something pulsed, not just the steady beat of her own heart, but a softer rhythm layered over it. Each thrum sent a ripple through her, like rings spreading on the surface of water. She closed her eyes and listened, for a moment. It was just her, the rush of her own blood, the stutter of her breath. Then, faintly, there it was again, another heartbeat. Not inside her. Not exactly. Nearby. Above. Maybe. Or down a corridor. Heavy. Measured. Edged with exhaustion and iron will. She didn't know how she knew it was his. She just did. The mark hummed under her touch. As if pleased she'd noticed, her chest tightened with something complicated and dangerous. Hope? Maybe. Terror shaped like hope. The door opened. She jerked her hand back like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Fingers twisting instead in the velvet blanket. Her heart leaped up into her throat as footsteps crossed the floor quieter without boots. But still carrying that same unshakable weight, Darius Nightwind stepped into the glow of the firelight without armor. Without crown. Just a man now. In a simple black shirt with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms. Scars pale against tanned skin. With the heavy cloak gone. He looked somehow larger and more human at once. The lines around his eyes deeper. The scar along his jaw more pronounced. The bond reacted to him before her thoughts could. It was a near physical sensation. A low, buzzing hum that started in the mark on her neck and spread outward, filling her chest, her ribs, her lungs. His presence pressed against her awareness. Not crushing, but undeniable. And with it came feelings, not hers, a flicker of guardedness. Like a door half barricaded, the weight of too many decisions resting on shoulders that had been carrying a kingdom since they were far too young. Beneath that, layered in a place he clearly didn't let anyone see often. Something softer and startlingly gentle. Concern. For her, in return. She knew exactly what he felt from her. Terror coiled tight in her stomach. Shame, like an old bruise wringing her ribs. The bone-deep, automatic instinct that made her want to apologize for breathing his air. For dirtying his sheets. For being the wrong choice in front of his entire court. She tried to smother it. It only made it louder. He didn't flinch at the wave of it. If anything, his jaw tightened. Like the force of those emotions hurt him more than any physical wound. He stopped a few steps from the bed, giving her space. The fire crackled. The mountain wind sighed against the high windows. "I felt you," he said quietly. And the words slid along the bond like truth. The moment you stepped into the court. Like a candle in a storm that refused to go out, her throat closed around any answer she might have made. "The mark responded before I touched you," he went on, eyes flicking to the silver glimmer at her neck. "This is no mistake. Raina Frost." The use of her name did something strange to her heart. The mark pulsed once in agreement. A tiny flare of heat under her fingers. Somewhere beneath all the fear, that distant howl stirred again. A fraction stronger, Raina stared at her hands. At the way they twisted in the blanket like they were trying to disappear. "No one will chain you again while I still breathe." His voice dropped even softer. Not a vow spoken to a crowd, but a promise laid gently in her lap. Something fragile he was trusting her not to break. She did not believe him. Not yet. Every bruise on her soul argued against it. Every memory of iron and locked doors and laughter, reminding her exactly how the world worked, but the bond believed. The mark burned warm at his words, soaking them in like thirsty ground taking rain, and somewhere, miles away and right there in her chest, the faint echo of a wolf lifted its head, listening. By morning, the whole fortress knew. Servants moved more quietly in the corridors. Guards straightened at doorways when she passed. Not out of respect. No one quite knew what to do with her yet, but with the wary stiffness people used when a storm sat on the horizon and refused to move. The council chamber of Nightwind Fortress was a long hall of dark stone and stained glass windows that turned the gray mountain light into slashes of blue and silver across the floor. Banners hung between the windows, each bearing the sigil of a loyal pack wolves in various poses. Moon phases. Crossed blades. At the far end, beneath the largest window of all. The Night King's chair waited, not a gilded throne, just a broad, carved seat, worn smooth, where countless hands and shoulders had touched it. Darius stood beside that chair when the Frostfall delegation was announced. Reyna lingered near one of the pillars, half hidden by its shadow. The high collar of the simple black dress one of the servants had given her brushing the healed skin at her neck. The mark beneath it hummed uneasily. As if it knew what was coming, the doors opened. Lord Halden Frost walked in like the fortress belonged to him. His hair, threaded with silver now, was combed back with ruthless precision. His dark coat fit perfectly, Frostfall's crest gleaming at his chest. Every step was measured, every line of his body controlled. At his shoulder strolled Cassian Rourke, all easy charm and careless grace, the pretty golden boy the pack had adored. His blonde hair fell just so. His smile flashed at the corners as he gave a shallow bow, the same smile he'd used on her once, before he'd tossed her aside like a broken tool. Reyna's stomach twisted. The mark at her neck cooled, then flared, catching the edges of her fear. Halden's gaze found her instantly. He did not frown. He did not smile. He simply looked, taking in the dress, the lack of chains, the faint tension in her shoulders, and then dismissed her, like she was a piece of furniture. Then he turned to Darius. "Your Majesty," Halden said, with a shallow incline of his head, "on behalf of Frostfall Pack, I bring grave concern." Darius did not invite him to sit, then speak. He replied, voice smooth as lake ice. Briefly, Halden folded his hands behind his back, a practiced gesture of respect that somehow managed to feel insulting. "The matter of your claimed mate." His eyes slid toward Reyna again, sharp and assessing. "There has been a mistake." A murmur rippled through the gathered advisors and lesser lords. Reyna wanted to shrink into the stone. The mark burned hotter. "A mistake," Darius repeated. The faintest edge crept into his tone. "The bond is written on her skin. It is written on a girl whose wolf has never surfaced," Halden said. "Reyna is practically human. She has failed every shift since she was 16. My pack has witnessed it. Our healers have examined her. There is nothing there." The words landed like blows she knew too well. Defective. Wolfless. Probably barren. Cassian stepped forward, eager to play his part. If she were truly fated. "Your Majesty, my own bond with her would have held." He flashed that easy smile at the room, letting the implications settle. "The moon does not tangle its threads so carelessly. It would not bind her weak. Then bind her to you." Reyna's fingers dug into her own arms. Weak. The old script tried to write itself in her bones again. Darius's eyes darkened. Silver irises ringed with shadow. "You presume to interpret the moon for me." Halden lifted his chin a fraction. "I presume to protect the integrity of your line. My king." The title came out cold as frost. "If you insist on keeping an unshifted, defective mate, the other packs will question the strength of the Night Throne. There is a lawful way to resolve this. A verification of bonds." The room stilled. Even those who had never heard of the ritual felt the weight of it in those words. "Ancient law," Halden continued smoothly. "If a claimed mate cannot shift in sync with their alpha, the bond may be declared void. It protects the throne from unfortunate accidents, from misguided choices." He didn't look at Reyna when he said it. He didn't have to. The mark at her neck pulsed once, sharp as a knife. Her heart stuttered. She wanted to shout that it wasn't fair, that he knew what he'd done to her, what he'd let be done, that if there was nothing there, it was because someone had wrapped chains around it long before she ever had a chance to try. But the words lodged behind her teeth like they always did. Darius's jaw flexed. Anger rolled off him in dark, simmering waves. The bond carried it to her, thick and electric, setting her nerves on edge. "This law," he said, "it would have my mate a guest in my fortress. Under my protection, risk her life for your comfort. It would have the truth revealed before the eyes of the moon. Halden answered. If the bond is false, it endangers us all. If it is real. His mouth flattened. Then Frostfall will accept it. He lied. She heard it in the tiny pause. Every instinct in Reyna screamed that this was a trap. But the law he invoked was older than any of them. Older than pacts and borders. Carved into moonstone when the first alphas still howled in caves. Once invoked, it could not be ignored without consequences. Darius's gaze cut to her. Sudden and sharp. He didn't speak. But the question was there. Reyna's throat closed. Her palms were slick with sweat. She wanted to say no. She wanted to refuse. To run. To curl up in that black velvet bed and pretend this wasn't happening. The certainty of her own failure loomed in front of her like a cliff she'd fallen from 100 times already. She had never shifted. Not once. Not fully. He took a step toward her. The council blurring at the edges of her vision. The bond buzzed between them. Agitated and fiercely alive. Enough, he said to the room. We will discuss this further in private. The words cracked through the air like a command. And the session dissolved. People bowing and backing out. Whispering behind their hands. Halden and Cassian left with the others. Cassian throwing one last. A measured glance over his shoulder, a look she couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, pity, fear, the doors shut. Silence hit like a physical thing. Reyna realized she was shaking only when Darius crossed the room and gently took hold of her wrists. His fingers closing around her hands to still them. The contact sent a flare of heat through the mark. Pain. Fear. His anger, they all tumbled together in the bond. The law is real. She whispered. The words scraping their way out. He's not lying about that. I've heard stories. If the mate can't shift with the alpha under the moon, the bond can be broken, declared Void. No one gets punished for defying the goddess if the law permits it. Her voice was flat on that last part. She knew about people dodging punishment. Darius's eyes searched her face. Do you believe the bond between us is false? She wanted to. It would make this easier. But the memory of his thumb on her neck, the explosion of fire and ice, the distant howl waking in the dark parts of her, they hung there between them. Impossible to deny. I believe. Her voice cracked. She swallowed. I believe I will fail. I've never shifted. Not once. Not even halfway. They tried everything. Shame rose like bile. I don't know how. His grip tightened. Not painfully, but with enough pressure to drag her attention back to him. I felt your wolf stir, he said. Each word like a stone laid carefully down. In the court, when the mark took, I felt it push against whatever holds it. That is not nothing. Reyna, that is not empty. The mark burned hotter, echoing his certainty. Under her skin, something small and exhausted flickered in response. Her instinct, the old, trained one, was to wrench her hands back, apologize for being a problem, tell him to let Halden have what he wanted. She almost did. The urge to disappear was an animal she'd lived with for so long it wore her name. Instead, she stood there with her past on one side and the impossible future on the other. And she shook. He must have felt it through the bond. Because his expression shifted. Anger banked under something unexpectedly gentle. If you want to run, he said quietly, I will hide you where they'll never find you. I'll take the blame. The throne. The council. Is your father? They can howl themselves hoarse at my door. You won't hear it. She blinked. Startled. No one had ever offered her an escape that didn't come with more chains. Or, his thumb stroked the inside of her wrists once. A grounding touch. The mark responded. A sharp sting that mellowed into warmth. We stand together. We invoke the same moon that marked us, and let her show them exactly how wrong they are. We. The word landed solid and heavy. Like a hand on her shoulder. Like a wall at her back. Her mind flashed to the cellar, the damp. The dark. the iron cutting into her skin. Her father's voice, cold as winter. Cassian's smirk on the terrace as he said those rejection words loud enough for everyone to hear. Defective. Wolfless. Probably barren. She saw herself standing small in front of them all. Head bowed. Hands folded. Waiting for judgment. She saw. Briefly. The flash of silver in Darius's eyes when he'd told her no one would chain her again while he still breathed. Fear twisted in her chest. Right beside it. Something else uncurled. Slow and fragile. Anger. Not the wild, burning kind she'd seen in others, but a tight, cold thread that had been building for years, wrapped around the part of her that refused to die no matter how many times she'd been told she should. She lifted her head, met his gaze fully. "We stand," she said, and her voice, though soft, did not waver. The mark flared between them, hot enough to make her hiss. He exhaled, like something in him had been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it came in sharp fragments. Snow under her bare feet, powder fine and blinding white. A sky so clear the stars looked close enough to pluck out of the air. Her hand, smaller, chubby fingers wrapped in calloused, gentle ones. Beside her, a woman with hair the same shade as the snow, long and loose down her back, skin glowing with the same pale light that kissed the snowdrifts. Her laughter was a sound Raina felt in her ribs. Even if she couldn't remember ever hearing it awake, they ran between dark pines, breath puffing in the air, her mother's stride easy and sure, Raina's shorter legs scrambling to keep up. The world nothing but cold and joy, and the promise of a first shift, then the snap of a twig, the metallic scent of fear. Shapes stepped out between the trees. Men in dark cloaks, eyes hard, hands gripping chains that gleamed silver even in the dim light. Hunters. Her mother turned, pushing Raina behind her. Her eyes, so gentle a moment before, flared suddenly bright white. Not like any wolf Raina had ever seen. Irises swallowed by moonlight. Power rippled off her in waves that made the snow tremble. "Forgive me," she whispered. And Raina's dream self didn't understand why she sounded like she was already grieving. The scene shifted. The forest melted into stone walls and the heavy smell of herbs. Raina lay on a table, tiny and stiff, older than in the snow, younger than the cellar, maybe 8. Elder wolves in dark robes stood around her, chanting words she didn't know. Hands raised, palms glowing with a murky, binding light. Something inside her clawed at her ribs, wild and desperate, trying to reach the surface. White light flickered beneath her skin. Fighting, then those chanting hands pressed down, chains made of pure moonlight wrapped around that struggling light. Layer after layer, forcing it down, down, down. The howl in her chest muffled, then buried, then silenced. Her mother stood at the edge of the circle, tears carving tracks down her glowing cheeks. Not stopping them, not saving her, just watching as Raina's wolf was forced deep underground, locked behind walls she could never reach. In the dream, Raina screamed at her to move, to fight, to do anything. In the dream, no one heard. She jolted awake with that scream still lodged in her throat, heart pounding, a nightgown damp with cold sweat. Tears streaked hot down her temples into her hair. Her hands clawed uselessly at her own chest, as if she could tear the invisible chains away. The room was dark. The fire banked low. The mountain whispered at the windows. The mark at her neck throbbed. Each pulse synced not just to her own racing heart, but to another, steadier beat somewhere else in the fortress, anchoring her. In the echo of the dream, something shifted inside her. The howling wasn't entirely gone, faint and hoarse, as if it had been screaming into a pillow for years. A wolf's voice rose in the distance of her own mind, not defective, bound. The difference slammed into her. She lay there, shaking, tears cooling on her skin. And for the first time in her life, She didn't think. What's wrong with me? She thought. Who did this to me, and how do I break it? The question hung in the dark. Dangerous and new. As the distant wolf's howl faded into a promise. Not forever. The plateau felt like the edge of the world. Wind swept across the high stone, sharp with the chill that lived at this altitude, carrying with it the smell of pine and distant snow. Above, the moon hung fat and pale, no longer blood-red but full and watchful, its light falling in long, pale stripes across the carved ground. Standing stones ringed the plateau, each one taller than 3 men, their surfaces etched with curling lines of ancient runes. The symbols glowed faintly, drinking in moonlight, pulsing with the slow heartbeat of old magic. In the center of the circle, a sigil had been carved straight into the rock, a complex weave of wolf and moon, bond and fate. Barefoot, Reyna could feel every line of it under her soles, the grooves biting cold into her skin. The stone seemed to vibrate with the weight of all the couples who had stood here before her. All the bonds proven or broken beneath this same sky. The court ringed the outside of the stones. Figures in dark cloaks and fine fabrics. Faces shadowed and expectant. Banners snapped in the wind. Murmurs rose and fell like the sea, hushed whenever the breeze shifted. Her father stood near the front, frostfall crest gleaming on his chest, hands folded neatly behind his back. He watched as if he were waiting for a deal to finalize. Eyes flat and calculating, the way he might look over a ledger before signing his name. Beside him, Cassian tilted his head, lips curved in that easy, practiced half smile, the same one he'd worn on the terrace the day he'd rejected her. There was a glint in his eyes that said he, at least, believed he knew exactly how this night would end. Reyna's hands shook where they hung at her sides. She curled her toes against the sigil to ground herself. The mark at her neck throbbed in time with the pounding of her heart. Earlier, in the ready chamber beneath the plateau, Halden had brought her a steaming cup and a thin, controlled smile. For your nerves, he'd said, pressing the ceramic into her cold fingers. This kind of ritual, it can be overwhelming. I wouldn't have you embarrass yourself or the Night King by collapsing halfway through. The tea had smelled of chamomile, honey, a hint of something metallic she'd been too anxious to question. Her hands had been shaking so badly she could hardly keep the cup from sloshing. She'd drunk it in greedy sips, desperate for anything that might quiet the tremor in her bones. It had left a faint, bitter aftertaste. Now, under the open sky, that bitterness bloomed. Darius stepped onto the sigil beside her, cloak stripped away, the lines of his shoulders stark under his dark shirt. The moon clung to him, catching on the edges of his hair, painting his scar in pale light. When he reached for her hand, the bond flared, hot and immediate, as if his touch completed a circuit. Remember, he said, just loud enough for her to hear over the wind. You're not alone here. Her fingers closed around his. The standing stone's glow intensified, runes brightening from faint silver to fierce white blue. The sigil beneath their feet warmed, magic stirring like a waking beast. Darius lifted his face to the sky. She felt it when his wolf surged forward, the sudden tightening of muscle, the way the air thickened around him, the wild pulse thrumming just beneath his skin. His eyes flashed silver, catching the moonlight, his bones aching with the urge to shift. The magic of the place reached for him, and he met it easily. As if this ritual were a familiar dance, it reached for her, too. At first, it was a gentle tug under her ribs, a call she recognized from dreams and half-remembered nights, a distant howl, an invitation. Something inside her strained toward it, claws scraping at whatever held it down, desperate to answer. Then it hit the wall. Cold iron slammed around that struggling light, faster than she could brace. The soft pull turned into a violent wrench, dragging her in 2 directions at once. The buried wolf inside her crashed against unseen chains, every impact sending shockwaves through her nerves. Pain detonated. It started at the mark, A sharp, piercing burn that lanced down her spine. Then it spread, racing along every nerve, setting muscle and bone, blood and breath alight. Her lungs clenched. The air tore in and out of her in ragged bursts. Her vision went white at the edges, the stones and sky and faces blurring into a smear of glaring light. Her knees buckled. She caught herself for half a second on Darius's hand, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Then the strength went out of her legs entirely. She hit the stone with a jolt that rattled her teeth. The sigil seemed to writhe under her, lines twisting, heat pouring through the carvings into her skin. She clawed at the rock, nails catching and splitting, smearing thin streaks of red across the ancient grooves. The mark at her neck burned like a brand pressed fresh into flesh. The tea's bitter taste rose at the back of her throat. Laced now with the unmistakable metallic bite of wolfbane, the crowd's murmur sharpened. No longer curious but vindicated. Defective, of course. The Frost Girl told you it was a mistake. They thought this was just her failing again. The same collapsing, the same gasping, the same pathetic attempt to reach a wolf that never answered. But this was different. This time, something did answer. It just couldn't break through. Inside her, the buried magic thrashed against its prison. That hoarse wolf voice keening in frustration and pain. The chains binding it held fast. Not mere metaphor now, but a real, choking presence. The herbs in the tea dug in like hooks, seeking that struggling light, reinforcing the walls around it. The standing stones responded to the conflict. Their glow swelled too bright, edging past steady radiance into a harsh, glaring glare. The air crackled. Runes that should have hummed in harmony with the moonlight faltered, flickering as if some unseen hand were twisting their purpose. Something was wrong with the magic. Even those who didn't know what they were watching could feel it, the way the hair on their arms stood up, the way their wolves shifted uneasily under their skin. Reyna tried to breathe. Each inhale was a knife. Her vision tunneled. Her heartbeat staggered, then raced. A scream tore out of her. It wasn't purely human. The sound started in her chest as a broken howl, the note of a wolf that had been locked underground too long and suddenly found a crack in the ceiling. It twisted on the way out, strangled by the chains and the poison threading her veins, emerging as a raw, terrible sound that made the nearest lords flinch back. Then, as suddenly as it had come, everything in her went slack. The pain didn't fade. It simply stopped reaching her. Her body went numb, heavy as stone. Her hands slipped from the rock. Her fingers unfurled, streaked with blood. The world swam, tilted, and then dimmed. She hit the carved sigil face first, cheek pressed against warmed stone, eyes staring at nothing. The last thing she felt was the frantic pounding of Darius's heart crashing against hers in the bond. His wolf clawing toward her through darkness, as if it could drag her back by sheer will. Her own heart stuttered once in answer, and then dropped into a slow, sluggish rhythm. Chaos erupted around her. Voices rose, shouting conflicting orders. Some called for healers, others for holy men, others to end the ritual before it tore the plateau apart. The standing stone's glow flickered wildly, runes pulsing in uneven bursts, like a heartbeat out of sync. Lord Halden moved. He stepped forward through the confusion, face appropriately grave, hands raised as if to calm the room. "She's too fragile for this," he called out, sorrow wrapped neatly around the words. "I warned you. The girl has never been strong. This ritual will kill her if we continue." He reached the edge of the sigil, looking down at the limp form of his daughter with an expression that mimicked concern so well, only someone who knew him intimately would see the cold calculation beneath it. "Let us take her," he said, voice pitched to Carrie. "Frostfall will see her tended. We have healers familiar with her condition. It is not fair to risk her life further for the sake of a law meant to protect us." Darius lunged toward her, fury in every line of his body. But formalists in the council, men who cared more for rules than for heartbeat, stepped in. Hands out. Voices insisting on process. On calm. On not making a spectacle. For a few crucial seconds, protocol became a cage. In those seconds, Halden's men moved fast. They lifted Reyna as if she were breakable glass, laying her onto a waiting stretcher, wrapping a cloak around her limp form, her head lolled to the side, hair falling across her face. Mark hidden, family care. Halden repeated, soothing the air with words. We take responsibility, as is our right. By the time Darius broke free of polite hands and snarled objections, the stretcher was already being carried toward the stair that led down from the plateau. The carriage waiting at the base of the mountain bore frostfall colors. Attendants loaded Reyna inside, tucking blankets around her like a beloved child, rather than a pawn that had just served its purpose. The gates opened, from the fortress, from the crowded road. It would look like they were heading toward the city healers, toward safety. The wheels turned, once out of sight of Nightwind's walls. The driver flicked the reins and guided the horses not toward the lantern-lit streets and their bustling healers, but toward the darker, the narrower path that wound away from the capital. The night closed around them. Trees thickened, the road roughened, the frostfall border lay ahead, and beyond it, jagged against the horizon, the silhouette of a ruined fortress that no one visited anymore. Black Hollow waited, empty and hungry. The cell was carved from the same stone as the mountain, but somehow darker, as if the rock had soaked up every bad thing that had ever happened inside it and refused to let go. Reyna woke on her side on a slab of cold stone, cheek pressed to grit and dust. Her wrists were dragged forward at an awkward angle, arms numb from how long they'd been held like that. When she tried to move, iron bit into her skin. Heavy cuffs circled both wrists, etched with runes that glimmered faintly whenever she strained against them. Chains ran from the cuffs to a ring in the wall, short enough that she couldn't fully sit up without pulling her shoulders out of alignment. The metal smelled like old rain and magic, the kind of iron meant to bleed power out of anything foolish enough to fight it. The air stank of old blood and dried herbs, sharp and stale. It clung to the back of her throat, made every breath feel like it carried ghosts. On the wall opposite, just at the edge of the dim lantern's reach, she saw them, claw marks, deep furrows gouged into the stone, running in frantic, overlapping lines. Some were long, carved by a creature with paws big as a man's hand. Others were smaller, like someone had torn at the rock until nails broke and skin split. Time had softened them, filled the edges with dust. But the desperation in the pattern was still readable. Someone had tried to get out of here once. Someone who hadn't made it. She swallowed, the sound too loud in the silence. Footsteps approached, measured and unhurried. No attempt to sneak. No reason to. The door scraped open. Lord Halden Frost stepped into the cell like he was entering a study he used every day. His coat was spotless. His boots shone. The only concession to the filth of the place was the slight wrinkle of his nose. Quickly smoothed. Good, he said, looking her over. You're awake. Reyna pushed herself up as far as the chains would allow, spine straightening on instinct. Blood roared in her ears. The mark at her neck felt oddly cool, dimmed from the burn of the ritual but still there. A quiet, angry ember, where her voice came out cracked. She swallowed and tried again. Where are we? Black Hollow, he replied, as if the name were as mundane as the weather. An old fortress on our border. Abandoned. Officially. Useful. In reality, he stepped closer, gaze flicking briefly to the claw marks on the far wall, then back to her face. I suppose, he added, it's fitting you woke up here. History does enjoy its echoes. A chill that had nothing to do with the stone slid down her spine. What do you mean? He studied her for a moment, and for the first time in a very long time, he looked almost interested, not in her as his daughter, or as a problem to solve, but as a piece on a board that had finally moved into position. You were not born defective. Reyna, he said, voice flat and businesslike. You were born wrong. The words hit harder than any insult. He clasped his hands behind his back, pacing a slow line in front of her. Your mother came from a bloodline most believed wiped out generations ago. A myth. Really. Tales told to pups to make the world seem bigger than it is. He glanced at her, mouth twisting faintly. White wolves, creatures of prophecy and disaster. Wherever they rose, the old blood fell. Thrones toppled. Dynasties burned. Images from her dream flashed through her mind. Snow. Chains. Her mother's eyes blazing white. When I learned what she was. Halden continued. I did what any rational man with a family and a pack to protect would do. I waited until you were born. Until the signs were clear enough. And then I had your wolf bound. Buried so deep you'd never touch it. No wolf. No prophecy. Simple. Bound. The word echoed what she'd felt in the dark corridors of her own mind. The chains in the cellar of her dreams. The chanting elders. Her mother's tears. You did that to me, she said slowly, tasting each syllable like poison. You let them. I ordered them. He corrected. Not unkindly. Just precise. A white wolf queen will topple the old blood. It's written in 6 prophecies. Carved into stone in the Crowmarsh ruins. Whispered in every court that takes such things seriously. Frostfall has held its place for centuries. I was not about to let some wild, moon-touched creature born of my blood tear that down. Her breath shook. The cuffs bit into her skin. You could have told me, she whispered. And what would that have changed? He asked. Genuinely curious. You would have struggled more. Suffered more. This way. You believed you were simply lacking, painful. Yes, but contained. He stepped closer, shadow falling across her. Then the Night King had to meddle, he said, a thread of irritation finally cracking through the calm. He chose you, marked you, called to what I'd sealed. Alone. You were manageable. In his hands. You are a weapon I cannot allow to exist. He looked down at her, eyes cool and assessing. If he keeps you, the prophecy becomes unstoppable. A white wolf queen on the night throne. He shook his head once. The old blood would crumble. Every pact. Every balance I've spent my life maintaining. Gone. So, he spread his hands, as if presenting a contract. I will let him come. Halden said. He is already burning up his own bond trying to reach you. That foolish loyalty will bring him straight into my circle. We kill him here. Sever the line. And the prophecy dies with him. You may yet be of use. Or not. The casual cruelty of it hurt more than overt hatred would have. You brought me into the world, Reyna said, voice raw. And the first thing you did was break me. He regarded her for a heartbeat, then inclined his head, as if she'd made a reasonable observation. For the good of the pack, he said. You were never meant to be a queen. Reyna, be grateful I tried to keep you from a destiny that would only end in your death and ours. He turned toward the door. Rest, he added over his shoulder. We have a long night ahead. The door shut with a heavy finality. Reyna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The mark at her neck throbbed. A faint protest beneath the numbness that wanted to settle into her bones. After some unknowable stretch of time, another set of footsteps approached. Lighter this time. Less certain, Cassian appeared at the bars. Hands wrapped around the iron. Golden hair mussed like he'd been running his fingers through it. His usual easy smirk slipped into place when he saw her. But it didn't reach his eyes. Well, he said, tone too light for the room. You do know how to make an entrance. Reyna, she stared at him. Too tired for barbs. You brought me here. A flicker of something guilt crossed his face before arrogance settled over it again like a mask. I helped escort you, he corrected. You're still Frostfall's responsibility. I'm still a loyal son of the pack. You rejected me. she said. Called me wolfless. Broken. I called you what you were. He shot back, then flinched as the words hung in the air, harsher than he'd intended. Look, you were always dangerous. Not in the way everyone gossiped about. In the way no one understood. Strange. Quiet. Things happened around you. Elders whispered after meetings. I watched your father's face whenever someone mentioned you, and I decided I didn't want to be tethered to whatever storm you carried. His fingers tightened on the bars until his knuckles whitened. When he offered me this instead, Cassian exhaled. Help him. And when it's done, Frostfall rises. He promised me a title. Land. A place at the center of it all. You know, I've always wanted more than just being the charming second son, so you sold me, she said quietly, his jaw clenched. You're exaggerating. You're bait. Rhaena, the Night King walks into a trap. We spring it. We cut this madness off before it can destroy everything. Everyone wins. Mostly, she repeated. Except him. And me. He looked away. For a heartbeat. His mask slipped entirely. And she saw what he was hiding, fear. What is he planning? She asked softly. Really? Cassian swallowed. Throat working. Ancient blood magic. He said. Voice low. Older than the packs. Rituals from before we had laws about what we were allowed to touch. The elders think they can rip the bond out of you. Drag whatever power is buried in there into a crystal. And snuff out the rest. Kill the king. Chain the prophecy. Restore the old order. And you, she pressed. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I think they're playing with something that might swallow all of us. But I've already stepped into the circle. Haven't I? He looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time since their childhood. She saw the boy who'd once shared stolen pastries with her behind the stables. I didn't want you dead, he said quietly. I just didn't want your curse on my life. The words might have hurt once. Now they simply settled. Then you should have stayed away, she replied. Because whatever happens tonight, Cassian, you're standing right in the middle of it. He swallowed again. Like the truth of that burned, without another word. He pushed away from the bars and walked off, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The sound thinner and less certain than before, far above Black Hollow. In a fortress carved into another mountain, a scarred king paced like a caged animal. The council chamber was empty now. The banners hung heavy. The stained glass windows threw fractured light across the floor, painting Darius in shards of blue and silver as he walked back and forth. Back and forth. One hand pressed to the mark at his neck. It burned, not with the bright, awakening heat of the choosing, but with a steady, smoldering pain that pulsed in time with a heartbeat that wasn't his. Each throb carried with it flashes Rhaena's terror, the sharp sting of iron at her wrists, the cold weight of stone walls closing in. The bond had been muffled since the failed ritual, wrapped in whatever binding Halden had woven around her blood. But it was not silent. It pulsed like a wound. Bleeding emotion. His advisors hovered at the edges of the room, wary of approaching too close. Black Hollow is a kill box, one said finally. An older man whose beard had more silver than black in it. They chose that place for a reason. Narrow approaches. Crumbling walls you can't trust. Cliffs on 3 sides. If you ride in, you ride into their teeth, another added. The council has already made it clear they won't sanction an offensive without proof of wrongdoing. If you fall into an ambush, Majesty, no one will take up arms on your behalf. They will call it unfortunate, regrettable, but not their problem. Their words rolled off him like water against rock. He saw Rhaena in chains. He felt her fear. His wolf snarled against his skin, desperate to run, to bite, to tear apart anything that dared touch what the moon had given him. She is my mate, Darius said. The words low and absolute. The mark is on my skin as much as hers. I will not leave her to be carved up in some forgotten ruin because the council fears bad optics. Majesty, if the moon gave her to me," he went on, voice rising just enough to cut through the cautious protests, "I will cross every curse and every prophecy they can throw between us to bring her home." Silence followed, thick and heavy. He knew what they saw when they looked at him now, not just a king, but a man about to walk into death with his eyes open. He saw it too. The calculations, the risks, the way the world would shift without him at its center. He'd made peace with that the moment he felt her being dragged away. Darius called for his most loyal guard, men and women who had bled with him before, whose first allegiance was to him, not to faceless councils or old families. "We ride," he said simply. They did not ask where. By the time the moon had climbed higher into the sky, a small, deadly group was riding hard through the night, hooves pounding the frozen ground, breath pluming white in the cold. The path to Black Hollow wound through forest and over narrow ledges, the ruined fortress rising ahead like a broken tooth on the edge of a cliff. In his mind, through the bond, Darius whispered a single promise into the aching space where Reyna's consciousness flickered. "Hold on." On the cliff, Black Hollow hunched against the sky. Half its walls collapsed, towers broken, lit only by a few sickly torches that burned near the main gate. Storm clouds gathered overhead, muting the stars, the air thick with the weight of impending rain or something worse. Reyna sat in her chains in the cell until they came for her. They unhooked the cuffs from the wall but didn't remove them, linking them instead with a length of chain between her wrists. 2 guards hauled her to her feet, ignoring the way her legs trembled, and dragged her through narrow corridors that smelled of damp and old smoke. As they pulled her into the open air of the main courtyard, the bond flared, a heartbeat, strong and furious, slammed into hers. Her own heart, sluggish and bruised, lurched to match it. He was close. Every step the guards took toward the center of the courtyard, every breath she dragged in. His presence grew louder in her chest. The mark at her neck burned, not with pain this time, but with urgency. In the center of the courtyard, a ritual sigil had been drawn in precise, meticulous lines. This one not carved, but painted powdered silver and something dark mixed into thick strokes that dried almost black. Blood. She realized. The realization made her stomach turn. They forced her to her knees in the middle of it. Chains clinking, hands digging into her shoulders. Around the sigil, robed elders stood at marked points, their hoods up, faces shadowed, energy gathered around them like storm clouds, the air humming with words not yet spoken. Halden waited at the far side, Cassian just behind his shoulder. Halden's posture was relaxed, as if he were watching a performance he'd seen rehearsed a dozen times. Cassian's jaw was tight, his shoulders drawn, eyes flicking constantly toward the arched entrance where the courtyard opened onto the outer walkways. "That's close enough," Halden called, voice smooth and carrying. The words were for Darius. He appeared in the entrance a heartbeat later, exactly as the bond told her he would. Cloak snapping in the wind, eyes already gleaming silver, his guard fanning out behind him in a silent, protective arc. For a moment, all movement stopped. Reyna felt the surge of emotion through him when he saw her rage. Fear. Possessive relief so strong it made her dizzy. Her own heart leaped in answer, their pulses slamming together hard enough to make her vision blur. "Let her go," Darius said, a voice low and dangerous. "No," Halden replied simply. He lifted one hand. The elders began to chant. The sound was wrong. It twisted the air, making it feel thick and sharp all at once. The sigil under Reyna's knees pulsed, lines of silver and dark flaring to life, creeping up her legs like cold fire. The words the elders spoke were older than the packs, heavy and dragging, each syllable a hook digging into the mark at her neck. The bond between her and Darius shuddered. She felt it stretching, thinned by invisible hands, pulled taut like a rope being tested before it was cut. Panic flared in her chest. Halden reached down behind him and lifted a spear. The iron tip gleamed dull in the torchlight. Its surface slick with a sheen she recognized now, that same bitter-sweet shine of wolfbane and silver, concentrated 100 times over. A weapon designed not just to wound, but to unmake. Reyna's breath caught. He drew back his arm. The spear flew. Straight as a promise. Aimed for the center of her chest. The world narrowed to that single line of motion. She didn't have time to move, even if the chains would have allowed it. Her body locked. Eyes wide. Heart stuttering in terror. Darius moved. He didn't think. Later. He wouldn't be able to say where the choice began. One moment he was standing at the edge of the sigil. The next he was in the air. Body twisting. Bones half-shifting. Claws ripping through his fingers as he reached for her. He hit her like a wave, knocking her sideways out of the spear's path. Her shoulder slammed into the stone. Breath driven from her lungs. The spear struck him instead. It drove in under his ribs, sinking deep. The poisoned tip vanishing inside him. For a heartbeat, there was only the impact. The stunned silence of flesh, realizing it had been breached. Then the poison hit. Darius staggered. Hand flying to the shaft. Blood soaked his shirt. Dark and wet. Spreading fast. His knees buckled. Reyna felt it all. Through the bond. The pain exploded across her own ribs. A burning, choking agony that set her lungs on fire. It flooded her veins. Hot and cold and wrong. Her wolf recoiling in horror as the poison rushed through his blood. His wolf howled. A sound of rage and pain that reverberated down the bond. Shaking loose pieces of her she hadn't known were still stuck. The Elder's chant reached a frenzied pitch. The magic they called didn't behave the way they expected. The mark on Reyna's neck flared. Not with the dull burn of suppression, but with a blinding, searing light. Lines of white-hot power shot from the mark down her spine, outward along her arms, into the ground. The stone beneath her cracked, fine fissures spiderwebbed out from her knees, splitting the painted sigil, disrupting the careful lines of silver and blood. The chant faltered, wobbled, then strained louder as the Elders doubled down, trying to force their will through the resistance. The suppression spells that had held her wolf for years shuddered. Halden, eyes narrowed, shouted over the storm of sound. Rip the bond out now, before he dies and takes it with him. Reyna's vision swam. Darius was on his side on the stone, one hand pressed to the wound. Blood slick between his fingers. Breath shallow. His eyes met hers across the fractured sigil, through the pain, through the poison. The bond carried one clear emotion. Fear. Not of death, not for himself. For her, she realized, with a clarity that cut through the chaos, exactly what was about to happen. If the Elders severed the bond now, they would tear it out of both of them, ripping away the thread connecting their lives and power. Darius would die alone on this cursed stone. Her wolf, whatever it truly was, it would be ripped from her and locked into some crystal to be used or buried as the old blood saw fit. She would go back to being a hollow shell, a broken tool. Or she would die with him, the life she'd never had whole. Unbound. Fully herself would vanish without ever touching air. Something in her that had bowed and bent and broken 1,000 times finally snapped. No, the word wasn't spoken aloud, but it rang through her mind, through the bond, down into the deepest parts of her, where chains had rusted in silence for years. No more. The world went white. Inside her, the cellar returned. Stone walls, iron chains, the chanting Elders, hands raised, mouths moving in the same old words. Her younger self lay on the floor, curled tight, small body shaking as spectral chains wrapped around a small, bright wolf made of light. Her mother stood at the edge of the circle, hair, a curtain of moonlight down her back, eyes blazing white, tears silver on her cheeks. This time, Reyna didn't stand outside the memory. Helpless, she stepped into it. She moved between the chanting Elders, and the child version of herself. Between the hands raised to bind, and the small, terrified wolf huddled under their shadows. Her feet left glowing prints on the stone. The chains that had once seemed unbreakable trembled at her approach. Her mother's eyes widened. Light flickered around her. Recognition and fierce pride flaring all at once. They were afraid of what you'd become, her mother said, voice echoing like it was coming from both far away and directly beside her heart. Reyna looked down at the iron links coiled around the younger wolf. At the way they cut into that small, luminous body. They should be, she answered. She reached for the chains. They burned. They bit. They tried to resist, to tighten when her fingers closed around them. For a heartbeat, she felt all the weight of years behind them, the fear of elders, the desperation of packs clinging to their power, the prayers of men like her father who believed control was the only path to survival. Then she pulled. The chains snapped, not one by one, not link by link, but in a rush, light exploding outward as they shattered. The chanting elders screamed, their forms dissolving into dust. The cellar walls cracked, fell away, turning into shards of shadow that dissolved into nothing. The smaller wolf surged upward, growing as it leaped, white light pouring from its form. It barreled into her chest, into the mark at her neck, and slammed back into the present. The ruined shackles on her wrists cracked audibly. Lines of fracture raced along their surfaces, scattering sparks. With a final, metallic shriek, they split, falling away from her skin in broken pieces. Power roared through her veins. Her eyes snapped open. The world was still white, but now it was not the suffocating blankness of pain. It was light blinding, searing, alive. It poured out of her gaze, turning the figures around her into silhouettes, casting long, twisting shadows on the courtyard walls. Her vision sharpened. She saw every line in the stone, every drop of Darius's blood, every fleck of dust in the air hanging between them. She pushed herself to her feet. Bones shifted. It started at her fingertips, the brittle crack of old ice breaking under the first touch of spring. Her hands lengthened, nails darkening into curved claws. It rolled up her arms, across her shoulders, down her spine, each vertebra popping into a new shape. Her ribs expanded, chest stretching, heart pounding in a larger den. Stronger cage, white fur cascaded over her skin, thick and soft and shot through with faint silver patterns that mirrored the crescent wolf of her mark. Her face pushed forward, teeth lengthening, jaw reshaping into a muzzle. The world tilted as she dropped to 4 paws, the stone cool and solid beneath pads that met it for the first time. When it was done, when the last pop of bone and whisper of fur fell silent, Reyna stood not as a girl, but as a wolf, a white wolf. She towered over the elders, over her father, over Cassian. Her shoulders were as high as a man's chest, muscles coiled under that pale fur, power thrumming through every limb. Her paws left glowing prints where they touched the fractured sigil, lines of light spreading outward from each step. The courtyard held its breath. She lifted her head. The howl that tore from her throat shook the fortress. It started low. A rumble pulled from the bottom of her lungs, then climbed, note after note, into a sound that was not just voice, but declaration. It carried the echo of every time she'd been told she was nothing, and the truth that had waited behind that lie. It rang off the broken towers, bounced down the cliffs, rolled out into the night like a thrown gauntlet. The elders' chant died mid-word. Several staggered, clapping hands to their ears as the crystals they'd arranged around the sigil shattered, shards flying in all directions, as if the sound itself had been a hammer. Some dropped to their knees, their wolves cringing away from the force of that call. The bond between her and Darius blazed, no longer a rope being tugged and frayed, but a beam of solid light connecting them. She spun, white fur catching the torchlight, and ran to him. He lay where he'd fallen, skin gray, breath shallow. The spear still lodged under his ribs. The poison had done its work, flooding his system with burning cold. His eyes were half-lidded, but when her shadow fell over him, they lifted. Silver dulled but still there. Reyna. He rasped, blood at the corner of his mouth. She pressed her muzzle to the wound. The bond opened wider. She plunged into him. It wasn't a physical movement, not in the way bodies moved. It was a dive inward, through the tether that bound them, into the river of his blood. It was night in there, darkness thick as ink, shot through with shards of sickly light, the poison. Jagged pieces of wrongness tearing through veins and arteries, ripping at cells. Trying to unmake what he was, she moved through it as a creature of light. A white wolf in a river of black. The shards cut her as she passed, each impact burning, each touch leaving streaks of agony. She gathered them anyway, drawing the poison into herself, feeling it lodge under her own skin, in her own blood. Blazing hot and cold at once. It hurt. It hurt in a way that made the ritual seem like a pinprick. Her heart stuttered, then pounded, then stumbled again. The bond wavered, flickering, threatened by the same poison now coursing through her. But where it found darkness in him, it found something different in her, her wolf, newly freed. Met the toxin not with flesh and helpless blood, but with moonlight. The poison sizzled when it touched that light. Snarling, trying to cling, the white glow flared brighter, enveloping each shard, dissolving it, converting it into something else pale. Clean radiance that flowed back into the bond, through Darius's veins, washing away the damage as it went. Above them, on the stone, his hand scrabbled weakly until it found her fur. Fingers curled into her coat, anchoring him to her, anchoring her to life. Reyna, he gasped, voice barely there. Stay, she held on. Light exploded outward from where they touched. A wave that rolled across the courtyard, slamming into Halden. Cassian, the elders, everyone. Those closest were thrown back, feet skidding. Some knocked flat. The torches guttered, then flared brighter. Flames whipped by a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. When the glare finally faded, the night was very quiet. Reyna lay on the stone, human again, breath coming in harsh, dragging gulps, skin slick with sweat, faint glowing marks traced over her body, lines of pale light that echoed the sigils in the courtyard, the runes in the standing stones. The shape of the wolf that now lived unbound in her chest. Darius knelt beside her. Upright, eyes clear and bright, skin no longer gray. The wound under his ribs was gone, replaced by a pale scar that mirrored her own mark. For a heartbeat, all they did was breathe. Then, slowly, he shifted. The Night King, ruler of 7 territories, knelt on one knee in front of the girl the world had called defective, not as a sovereign to a subject, not as a man humoring a myth, but as someone placing something fragile and priceless in another's hands. He tilted his head, baring his neck to her. It was the most vulnerable gesture a wolf could make, one no one made lightly. The courtyard watched, stunned. Every instinct Reyna had ever been trained with Bo. Apologize. To make herself smaller warred with what she felt now. Power hummed under her skin. Not the destructive kind, but the steady, anchored strength of someone standing in the exact place they were meant to be. She pushed herself up onto her knees, body still shaking. The glow on her skin dimmed, settling inward, taking its proper place. The mark at her neck burned warm. She leaned forward. Her lips brushed his skin. Her teeth followed. A gentle, careful pressure at the place where his pulse beat strong. The bite was small, barely enough to draw blood, but the magic in it was not. The bond surged. The mark on his neck flared in answer. The crescent wolf merging with the star in her own. Light flowed between them, looping, circling, knitting something that had been one-sided into a completed circle. When it settled, when the brightness faded, the marks on both of them had changed. No longer separate symbols, but a shared one, a crescent, wolf wrapped protectively around a star. The lines identical on both throats. Around them, guards recovered, seizing Halden and the surviving elders, forcing them to their knees. Iron clapping around wrists that had once held chains for others. The old order, in its raw, unmasked form, and knelt before what it had tried to destroy. Cassian stood off to one side, face bloodless, eyes wide, staring at the woman he'd once dismissed as baggage. Shame flickered across his features when her gaze brushed past him. She did not stop. She did not speak to him. Some debts were beyond words. In the days that followed, the world shifted. Halden and the elders were dragged in chains back to Nightwind Fortress to answer for blood magic and treason before wolves who no longer feared them. Laws were rewritten. Stories were told. Children would someday learn about the night a white wolf rose in Black Hollow and shattered the chains that had kept their world small. Reyna rode back to Nightwind at Darius's side. Not as a prisoner or a pawn, but as something the songs hadn't found words for yet. On the first clear night after their return, she stepped out onto the highest balcony of the fortress. The wind tugged at her hair. Cool and clean, the territories spread out below forests and rivers, valleys and towns. All of it washed in moonlight. Her eyes, when she looked out, held a faint ring of white around the familiar wolf gold. A quiet reminder of what lived beneath her skin now. Unbound, behind her, Darius leaned against the stone, watching her rather than the view. His voice, when it came, was soft enough that only she could hear it. "They called you broken," he said. "Barren. Wrong. An embarrassment to hide in cellars." She remembered the words, the looks, the way she'd folded herself smaller and smaller to try to fit into the space they'd allowed her. "They were wrong," she said simply. He smiled. The real thing that softened the hard lines of his face. "The moon doesn't make mistakes," he murmured. "She hides her sharpest weapons in the ones everyone else throws away. Lets the old blood grow complacent. Then, when it matters most," he nodded toward her mark. "She sends someone like you." Reyna let the wind wash over her. Let the bond hum between them. Steady and sure. Below, in the courtyards and streets, life went on. Wolves trained. Children laughed. Fires burned against the dark. Somewhere, stories were already being told about a girl in a plain gray dress and a king with a scar on his jaw. About chains and cellars and a howl that shook a fortress apart. She reached up, fingers brushing the shared mark at her neck, grounding herself in the warmth there. "The night they tried to break me," she said quietly, tasting the truth of it for herself as much as anyone who might listen later. The world got a queen instead. 2 heartbeats answered in perfect sync, her own and his. Carried through the mark, through the bond, through the new shape of everything, under the watchful eye of the moon. The shared mark on their throats glowed faintly, pulsing in time to that twin rhythm, a promise etched in light that this was only the beginning.